as a counterpart to healthy limits, or reasonable limits. Yeah, reasonable limits. So, again, this week we'll talk about what is impaired limits. And I want to say what are impaired limits, but because impaired limits is like a singular, schema domain, it is. So, sorry, it's my grammar going crazy. What is impaired limits? Do I have it? And how can I be transformed? What is impaired limits? Do I have it? How can I be transformed? So, what is impaired limits? I'm glad you asked. So glad. Because it's story time again. So, this time I asked my mom for some stories about my childhood. And my text feed was long. She was like, oh, I've been waiting for this day that you would ask me this, because you were difficult. So, once upon a time, way back in the day, I had anger issues, way back, I definitely don't have them now. But way in the total past, obviously I never get angry. This is all joking. So, yeah, I had really bad anger issues as a kid. So, it was either my way or the highway. I would get mad about pretty much everything, but the thing that I would do was I would throw stuff. So I would pick up anything in sight and be like, ah! And that scares me as a parent, because I hope my kid just doesn't have the throw stuff gene, because if your kid starts punching you, it's a kid. But if a kid picks up a remote and chucks it at your face, it's kind of gonna hurt. So that was me. And I loved Thomas the Tank Engine. Who here loves Thomas the Tank Engine? That's right. Yeah, so I love Thomas the Tank Engine. I had a bunch of them. I had the little train track set in my room. And one day, my older brother, Cole, he's 3 years older than me. I must have been 5 or 6, somewhere pretty young. And he comes in and he's like, I want to play with them. And I didn't like that. I did not want him to play with my Thomas the Tank Engine. They were mine. And so he comes in and I just scream, no! 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 And I just start throwing a fit just because he wants to play with my Thomas the Tank Engine. My mom comes up, she's like, what is going on? And she's like, Ben, sharing is good. And I'm like, what? This is crazy! So obviously that wasn't good. So what she did was she put me in timeout in my room. She took the toys and put them in my brother's room. And then he was playing them without me. And I could not have that. So what I did was I pocketed one of the tank engines. And I just started throwing it at the walls and at the door. So my parents still own that house to this day. And the door still has holes in it from that. Another time, so we're still going. I really wanted to go to my neighbor's house. His name was Joe. I think I was 7 or 8 at this time. I want to go to Joe's house, but I hadn't done my homework yet. And my mom was like, you have to do your homework before you hang out with Joe. Obviously, it's that's a good limit, reasonable limit. And so I didn't want to do my homework. So I started to break my pencils. And so I kept breaking them. She would sharpen them, and I just kept breaking them until eventually I literally couldn't do my homework. She didn't let me go to Joe's, obviously. But I was so stubborn that I did not want to do anything she said. So what does this have to do? What does this have to do with impaired limits, Ben? Basically, I'll show you. So there are different exasperated encounters that can lead to you having impaired limits as a kid. So anger worked as a tool for the child to get their way. So that was me. I often used anger to manipulate or attempt to manipulate my parents. Sometimes they capitulated, sometimes they didn't. So anger sometimes worked for me as a tool to get my way. And then also, if you had few or no boundaries early on, or if your boundaries had to do with achieving excellence, the few boundaries that you did have, if you were shamed often, or had no recognition for your accomplishments, these are all things that can happen, from a higher degree or a lower degree in your childhood. And they probably often happened for some of us, and for other of us, maybe they never happened, right? It just depends. And no parent, again, is perfect. So for me, when I threw tantrums and it worked, I began to recognize I might be able to get away with my anger and then get what I want. So if you took the schema test and you have any of these schemas, then you might be under impaired limits. He raised his hand. So if you have entitlement or grandiosity, which means, feeling special, better than others, feeling like you deserve something, insufficient self-control and self-discipline, or approval-seeking and recognition-seeking. Remember, just because you relate to these words, which I relate on some extent to all of these words, that doesn't mean you necessarily have the schema. So remember, the schemas comes particularly from from the lack of your core emotional needs from your parents. And so you can read up on the schemas and evaluate for yourself, okay, I think I might have this negative habit. But there's also tests that can help you do that. So we send those texts out in the group chat. And, if you ask your neighbor, whoever brought you out, they should be able to give you that test if you haven't taken it. So for me, I scored a 19 on entitlement, which is still fairly low. But it's my fourth highest. They laughed at me, but it says fairly low. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that I have a little bit of entitlement because I really did get my way as a child because I was so stubborn. And my parents only had a certain amount of bandwidth. I mean, my mom and dad were both working. I was difficult. And sometimes, to get him to shut up, we'll get him what he wants. And so my parents, I had the most wonderful, blissful childhood. And I thank them so much for that. But they weren't perfect. I'm not going to be perfect as a parent. And so please have grace on your parents, guys. This isn't Blame Your Parents Day. So, I have a little bit of that in me as well. But what's interesting, if we go to the scriptures, you kind of find these schemas within there and a little bit of dysfunction in there. The scriptures are overwhelmingly, filled with just the fingerprints of people and real life situations and brokenness and pain. And it's funny how we take these kids' stories, we take these very adult stories and turn them into kid stories. And we'll talk about one of them, which is Esau. Right? So Esau had a whole lot of freedom as a child. And there's also, in terms of dysfunction in their family, you guys remember the favoritism at play? Yeah. Do you remember which parent loved Jacob? Anybody? Rebecca loved Jacob. And why?
Because he was a mama's boy.
Yeah, the Bible doesn't say that exactly, but I guess so. And Isaac, quote unquote, had a taste for wild game, so Esau was a hunter, and so he liked Esau. But there's favoritism at play, and that also can really, really change the way that we develop, right? But we're not going to get all into those complexities. But I will read Genesis 25:27. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country. So I'll just stop right there. Esau could go out almost at will, and he was a hunter. So he had a lot of autonomy, perhaps impaired limits. In the next scripture, the story goes that Esau's out hunting, and he comes back just famished. And Jacob, devious guy he is, his name literally means deceiver. He takes a bowl of, what is it, porridge or soup? Yeah, soup? Stew. Yeah, same thing. And he bribes Esau into giving him his birthright. Back then, you had a birthright to your parents, property and everything there. So Esau says, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? And so if you can interpret this, he's literally about to die. But I think it's something more like, I'm dying, I don't know, something like that. Maybe a little bit entitled, I don't know. So it's not like Jacob was much better. He had different issues, but you do see in the Bible just a little bit of impaired limits on the part of Isaac and Rebecca. Yeah, Rebecca. Yeah. Sorry, all the names get mixed up. Rachel, Rebecca, Leah. Cool, so we've discussed last week, we discussed immaturity. So, yeah, it's kind of funny. And that was the first word that came to mind when it came to impaired autonomy and performance, right? Like you don't have the ability to do things yourself, you really rely on other people, you're just immature. Now this week I thought the lack of self-control really describes this schema domain, right? So impaired limits, lacking limits. which would be kind of like lacking self-control. So the scriptures really talk about the importance of self-control. And one of my favorite scriptures that talks about self-control, we're talking about at the Pepperdine Bible Talk, so if you go to Pepperdine, please join that, which is the fruit of the Spirit. It's a classic. It says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, and I'm just going to stop right there. Those are the fruits of the Spirit I think of. Love, joy, peace. They're so nice. They're so easy to remember, and they're the first three. They happen to be there, but as soon as you start going, forbearance, and you're like, oh, okay, now I have to like actually kind of put in some work. Kindness. And I think that people underestimate the value of kindness as well. Like, just be nice to people. Like, be warm for people. That is a fruit of the Spirit. I guess you never think about that. Goodness, and goodness in Greek has a lot to do with charity. Being a good person. Being a nice, kind, it all kind of goes the same way. Faithfulness. That one's hard for our generation. We've already talked about this. Gentleness. Being gentle. Not being always so harsh. And self-control. The forgotten child of the fruits of the Spirit. Self-control is so important. In fact, it is a direct byproduct of God's Spirit working in your life. If you lack self-control, you lack the Spirit's working in your life. Guys, self-control is huge. It is a huge part of what it means to be an image bearer of God. To have God in you. God being one with you. Self-control is huge. And I think that, excuse me, a lot of us can have self-control and discipline when it comes to things that we desire and our own ambitions. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Things that might bring us glory or bring us comfort. Whatever it is, right? But are you also disciplined with the things that you should do rather than just want to do? And I think that's the key difference between like the worldly view of discipline and self-control and a godly view of where our efforts, our discipline, our self-control should be going, right? Remember that those with this schema domain, impaired limits, often like to achieve because they had not received recognition from their parents. So what they did was they overcompensate by creating their own limits and then getting what they want, right? So a lot of achievers, remember, achievement and approval seeking is one of the schemas within the schema domain. They know how to be disciplined, but they do it for their own gain rather than for what they should be doing. So it's different to pursue, I don't know, I'm just thinking in my life, like for me, pursuing playing guitar, I did that for a long time. It's different. That's easy for me. What's hard for me is to do my quiet time every morning, you know, to connect with God, something I ought to do. Helping and caring for my friends, something I ought to do. I often struggle to really be an encouraging person. And what about when you're assigned to do something you don't want to do by your teacher or your boss or whatever it is? And again, I liked to really pursue the things that I like, but in school I wasn't always the best. So, are you disciplined with things you should do rather than want to do? So, I'll let you guys chew on that a little bit. So, the next part that we're asking is, do you have it? Do you have impaired limits? And there's a little thing. What does it say? Sweetheart, I saw a no parking sign. I don't think we can park there. Who cares? I pay my taxes. I want a table for two. Do you have a reservation? Sorry, if you did not make a reservation, you will need to take a number. How dare you try to deny me a table? Do you know who I am? Excuse me, does anyone know who this man is? He doesn't seem to know. Should we know who he is? Yeah. Very good, very good. Remember, impaired limits are these schemas. And we're going to have a midpoint discussion now. So so what you're going to do is just discuss with your table. We have circle tables. I'll give you guys 5 to 10 minutes, just whenever you guys are kind of done talking, to discuss these questions with each other. If you really don't want to discuss, that's okay. Just let your table know, and we'll respect that. So the questions are, do you have any schemas in this domain, according to the test, which is yes or no question, or I didn't take the test. Did you experience any of these exasperated interactions? Anger worked as a tool for the child to get their way. There were few or no boundaries early on, shamed often, or no rejection or recognition for accomplishments. And in what areas of your life are or aren't you self-controlled? So go ahead, look at your neighbor, and discuss for 5 minutes. Thanks for participating. This is the kind of thing that really helps us grow. All right, a little bit of growing pains is always good, and so if we can think deeply, go into the hard stuff, then we can learn how to undo those habits, right? And by the way, that's a typo. It should say impaired limits, not impaired autonomy and performance. So how can I be transformed? Or Shia LaBeouf is going to help us. Does anyone have Romans 12:2 memorized? All right, I'm going to give it to Andrew.
Do not be conformed to this present world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may know what is God's will, what is good, and well-pleasing and perfect. Yeah.
Yes. That's right. Do not conform to the pattern of this. It was a translation error. It's not. He got it right in a different translation, I presume. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So reminder, you can be transformed. Your brain is malleable. Your brain can change, right? We can be transformed. So the Bible and psychology agree that our brains are super amazing. Our brains can literally transform and do miracles. It's so incredible what our brains can do. So we can change the habits we have depending on how strong the neural pathways are. It could take way longer, but one thing is for sure, it's proven you can change those negative habits, those negative thought patterns. You can change your physical abilities. You can do all kinds of things. I remember when I was first learning the bass guitar, I had a bad habit of curling my pinky in when I was playing the notes. So I would always connect my finger movement with my pinky being shaped like this. And when I started having to play faster, playing wider notes, it got pretty hard for me to play, so I had to undo that. And it was almost like relearning how to play the bass. It wasn't as long, but at first it was like, this is impossible. And with more and more practice, my brain learned how to undo that neural connection, right? In the same way, we can change our habits, right, and our schemas, and we can be reparented. And it's so amazing what our brains can do. Negative social habits, negative thought patterns, and even addiction. Isn't it amazing that people can overcome addiction? When you just replace an entire neurotransmitter with something like heroin or cocaine, your brain just stops creating it. But with time and with a whole lot of effort, people can overcome that and train their brains to be better. It's just amazing. On the other side of it, we can build new habits in place of bad ones. So let's talk practicals. First, go to the scriptures. Go to the scriptures to know what habits you want. Right? So like I said, you can create all the habits in the world you want. You can move your neural pathways all you want, but you might not be doing it for the right reasons. You might not be doing it for God. Does anyone have 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 memorized? Yes, it's that one. Yep, there you go. All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. The Bible talks about what the Bible's for, which is good for us. It helps us it says correcting, and I say correct your brain, right? Train in righteousness. It tells us what's right and what is good, right? So that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped. So if we're not using the Bible, we're missing out. We're majorly missing out. Why would we not go to this divinely inspired book? Why would we not? We have to go to it. So personally, let me see what the next slide is. Yeah, practical takeaway. Make a goal from the scriptures for you to work on. So start with what it says. Don't start with what you just want.
Yeah.
Start with what it says, not just with what you want. Personally, I read Colossians 5:12-17. And I got from it, I need to be more thankful and thoughtful. Like I was saying, I can often be very unthankful. Like I often go to the negative. And that's just so unthankful of me because God has given me and us so much. And there's always something to be thankful for. And then also being thoughtful. To just think of people and care about people and get them gifts. And I already been talking about this. So I just am so unthoughtful. So that was a theme that I came up with for the year. Be thankful and thoughtful. But make a pretty specific goal. So first practical, make a goal from the scriptures for you to work on. Pretty simple stuff. This is all something you could literally do this week. Yeah. You could literally put this into practice and begin retraining your mind this very week. Second, begin forming those habits. Sorry, I know it's just so basic, but let me give you guys some tips on how to do that. Make it specific. Again, mine was the theme, but do something more like if you want to pray, perhaps you read, pray without ceasing. And then you say, okay, I want to pray. Do something like, okay, I'm going to pray at 7 a.m. daily based on X scripture, right? Or I want to run. Physical training is of some value. I don't know. Your body's a temple. You just say, okay, I'm going to start small. I'm going to run every other day between these classes. Like give a time and a place and everything. Because you're setting yourself up for success, right? Rather than something very broad. Okay, I'm just going to run. It's like, dog, you're going to run 3 times and never run again. That's what's going to happen. Focus on one thing at a time. It's so much easier to over time build habits one at a time. That way you don't have to always beat yourself up because you're just so overloaded. Again, you're setting yourself up for failure. But big part of creating new habits in your life is that you feel like you're growing. If you feel like you're growing, if you can see the big picture and the progress, you really can grow so much better. And focusing on one thing at a time is huge there. So don't overwhelm yourself. Some of you guys are carrying the world on your shoulders and then some. And you want to learn more things and just one at a time. God doesn't expect us to be Jesus and more. He expects us to be who we are. Yeah, he's already been Jesus and given it up for us, right? So take it easy on yourselves a little bit. Lastly, keep track of the progress. Journal it. Get a whiteboard that you have on your wall, a calendar. Put an X for days that were successful and nothing for days that you didn't do whatever goal it is that you're making. But it helps you, again, stay motivated if you can keep track, because sometimes you're like, I only prayed 3 days this week. It's like, wait, but I was only praying 1 day last month. Wait, this is good, and you keep going, and you feel that growth, and you can see what God is doing in your life, and that's a testimony for you to share with others. Like, God has been working in this way in my life. I've grown so much, and you can just share that. It just makes you fired up, right, for what God's doing in your life. So those are the 3 really simple. You could literally do them this week. Pick something from the scriptures and implement them in this way toward your goals, right? Think, what is that thing that you just know you want to change? What is that negative habit I've got to undo? What is that positive habit I really want to work on, right? Pick something, guys. I made this so practical so that you guys, I just want to see us as a team really grow. Really set ourselves up for success, right? And be rooted in the scriptures the whole time, right? So those are my practicals, really simple. So recap, we've gone over what is impaired limits. Recognizing that with lack of good limits, we can lack self-control. We've explored to what extent we have impaired limits, whether or not we have the schemas or how we can improve on self-control in general, even if we don't have the schemas. And lastly, we've gone over how to create or end habits, which is making goals from the scripture, making them specific and one at a time, keeping track of progress. So we're going to end off with one more discussion where you guys can discuss your tables again. And the questions are, why is self-control difficult for you personally? Do you have any negative habits that you would like to change? Do you have any positive habits you would like to learn? And so you can think about your practicals here with each other or be inspired by one another at the table. So go ahead, look at your neighbors again, and you can discuss.